I come from an alcoholic family. Both my parents, my father and my mother, were alcoholics. My father also was a drug. He used drugs in and out of my life, in and out of jail. He spent more time in jail than he has out of jail. So, just to give you that kind of picture, I lived with my mom most of my life. Around the age of 8 or 9 was when all of the fights started with my mom and my stepdad. My parents did divorce when I was really young. I had no memories of them being together. It basically just was fights. They would drink, they would argue, they would fight. Really not a huge impact at that point on my life other than just the arguments. I did go here to Dittmer, 7th grade year. I did. I'm from Sailor Park. That's where I live. I don't know if any of you ladies know where that's at. I was on the Cougarettes. I was in drill team. I was on the drill team at elementary school. I was on the volleyball team. Had a lot of things going for me. And the school-wise, grades were up, all that good stuff. My brother, however, on the other hand, started getting in trouble. So my parents decided they were going to move us out to the country, out to Indiana. So there goes Laura. There goes my drill team, there goes my swim team, there goes my volleyball, all my friends, everything I had known, all because my brother was getting in trouble. My parents felt if they moved us out to the country, we wouldn't be, there's no trouble out there, right? Wrong. So around the age of 11, 12, my father, was in and out of my life, and he would come pick me up. There were lots of times he'd say, he's going to be there, and didn't show up, and there I sat on the front porch, upset, waiting on him, just disappointment after disappointment. But as I got older, he kind of became more of a friend than he did my father figure. So he would come to pick me up, and he'd be drunk. So I got the bright idea, instead of my dad driving around drunk, and driving me around drunk, because we all know that's dangerous. You can have car accidents, kill other people, kill yourself. I decided to ask my dad to teach me how to drive, so that I could drive, so he wouldn't be behind the wheel when he was drunk. So my dad taught me how to drive, stick shift, 11 years old. So he'd come pick me up, he'd be drunk, I'd say, hey Dad, let's get down the road a little ways from Mom's house, and why don't you go ahead and let me drive? And normally he would. So I would drive him around, whether it was to his parties, friends' house. They were all, his friends into drugs, doing drugs. I was around marijuana, cocaine, seeing my family doing it. I was one that kept him out of fights. He liked to fight a lot. Once he got drunk, he got really belligerent. A lot of his friends wouldn't be able to get in his face, and tell him, hey Mark, you need to calm down, you're making this bigger than what it is. I was the only one that seemed to be able to get in his face and say, Dad, you need to chill. You need to calm down, you need to go away, you're going to get thrown back in jail. So I was in the midst of fights, drugs, alcohol, all this. And it took a toll on me. Still back with my mom and my stepdad, was still, their arguments were escalating, and now the physical abuse started coming in on my mom. There'd be slaps, he'd hit on her, he'd beat on her. So I started getting in with the wrong crowd at this point. And I started doing drugs. I was doing marijuana, I was popping pills. I never got into anything heavier. I never did cocaine, heroin, anything like that. Pretty much just the marijuana and taking pills. Started partying with my friends, hanging out with seniors, doing things I shouldn't have been doing at the age I was. So my dad found out that I was doing these things, and eventually me and my dad become party partners. Started smoking dope with my dad. My dad put a hit of acid in my mouth at the age of 15. What parent does that? I couldn't imagine. I have 2 children. I have a 9-year-old girl and I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I could not imagine putting a hit of acid in either one of my kids' mouths. But I was partying. I thought it was cool. I'm living life with my dad while we're out partying and things, and just took the wrong path. At the time, I thought, life was great. Had a boyfriend. That was my world. I was running the streets for a while, staying overnights at boyfriends' houses. My mom really didn't care. She couldn't control me. I was out of control. I have called my mother every name in the book. I have hit my mother. My mother has hit me. We went down some pretty dark roads. And it all swarmed around this whole abuse of alcohol and drugs. It's what it all caused. That's what it caused us and our family. Very dysfunctional. So I met Brian, which was my boyfriend at the time when I was about 13, 12, 13, 14. I was sexually active at a very young age. Yes, ladies, I was. I was with him. He became my world. He became my stability. Even though he still smoked marijuana, we never really drank. Our thing was smoking dope. And he slowed me down, though. He brought me back down to earth, and I stayed home more. I was more respectful with my mom. He became my stability. The only stability I probably ever had in my life until I got older. So my mom loved him and adored him because, you know, she's seen her daughter starting to calm down. I wasn't so out of control. I wasn't on the streets running with my friends. She knew where I was. So of course she's happy and all that. Well, as the fights escalated with my mom and my stepdad, I became more confident in myself as I got larger, as I got bigger. And I got tired of the abuse that I was seeing my stepfather do to my mother. And one night, my boyfriend and I were upstairs in my room, and they started their arguing and fighting, and next thing I know, I heard this big smack. And I come running down the stairs. And this time, I decided to confront my stepfather. And I told him, I looked at him, and I said, why don't you hit somebody your own size? My mom was a very tiny woman, maybe 100, 110 pounds at the most. And he hauled off and clocked me right across my face, and down to the ground I hit. I come back up. And I looked at him, I said, that's your first mistake, and that's going to be your last. So I called the state police out in Indiana. They came out, took my statement, and told them what happened. And the police officer at that time told me, you know, this is a pretty big decision that you're doing. I was maybe 15 at this point. He says, you know, I don't think you realize the consequences of your choice by doing this. And I explained to him I did. He said, well, I'm going to hold on to this police report, and I'm going to give you overnight to sleep on. And I'll call you back in the morning. And then if in the morning you still want to press charges against your stepdad, I'll file the paperwork. So morning came, my mom came upstairs, begged, pleading, and borrowing. Please don't do this. Please don't press charges. And I just looked up at my mom and I said, you know what, Mom? I'm going through with the charges because I'm not going to let a man hit on me like you have your whole life. I'm breaking the cycle today. And I pressed the charges. Now, within that decision, looking back at it now as an adult, I'm just kind of sitting here now like, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't a good decision that I had made, because life as I knew it right then come crumbling down. We lost our $150,000 house. We lost everything that my mother had worked for. My stepdad owned his own business. He had to up and move that because he left. He went on the run because he wasn't going to do no jail time. So they split up and they divorced. At that point, my mom's alcoholism just spiraled down. She went from 6 to 12 pack of beer a day to vodka over ice or any other kind of whiskey that she could get a hold of. Drunk from the time she got up until the time she went to bed. We lost the house, we moved into another house. Of course, I'm still with Brian. He's still my stability. I'm back and forth between staying at his parents' house, staying at my mom's house, just kind of bouncing all over. My mom and I had gotten into it one morning while I was getting ready to go to school. In the house that we were in, we had no electricity. We had no running water. Our food was in coolers with ice packed over top of them. And I knew at this point in my life that wasn't right. Wasn't supposed to be. You're supposed to have electric. You're supposed to have running water. Your parents are supposed to provide for you, not party with you and not providing. That's just not what a loving mother does. So the fight that we got in that morning, I decided, I'm going to show you, Mom. I went on into school and I told the counselors, I have no electricity. I have no running water. When I made this decision, I didn't do it because I wanted to better my living conditions, because I wanted to better my mom, because I wanted my mom to get help. I did it because I was pissed off at my mom. So guess what? I wasn't allowed to go back home. They made me stay with a friend for a couple of days, and then I became what they call a ward of the state, where the state has custody of me. Because remember, my dad, he's over here in and out of jail, got DUIs, drug possession charges, you know, he's not fit. My mom over here, half drunk, can't even provide electricity and running water, so here sits this kid. So I got put in a group home. It's called the Yes Home, what they call it out in Indiana. It's for kids that have been emotionally, physically, sexually abused by a parent, a friend, or in my situation where the parents just can't provide. So I was stuck there for about 6 months. I was hell on wheels because they felt I had an attitude, and I probably did, but at the time I didn't feel like I had an attitude. I was pissed off. They go throw me in here, take me away from everything I know. I'm not allowed to see my boyfriend because he's overage, I'm underage. And I can only go see my parents, or my dad at the time, if I was good enough and they went by a number of system points. So if I misbehaved, or I didn't do my chores, or I didn't do this, I got points knocked off. And if you got something knocked off, you weren't allowed to use the phone. You weren't allowed to go home for home visits. So my father, at this point, started getting his life together a little bit, and with the help of my grandparents. So they decided they were going to go into court, and they were going to try to let my dad get custody of me, which was a bunch of loopholes they had to jump through. They had to have the system come out and make sure the home was safe, make sure I had my own room at that time with my age. Now my mom at this point hadn't been heard of. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. No one even knew where she was living, anything. She just fell off the face of the earth. So we go through the court system, and the courts finally, say, hey, we're going to go ahead, we see your dad fit, we're going to make, monthly visits to the house, make sure everything's going okay with you. And that was when I was 15. I got out of the Yes Home when I was 15 on May. I turned 16 on that June. I'm still with Brian. My father didn't really care too much for him, just because I think my dad at that point was really trying this time to stay clean, to stay sober. He had his daughter. Really wanted me to stay out of the situation that I was in with Brian. And I didn't see it that way. Because Brian was my stability. He was the only thing that gave me stability when my parents were nowhere to be found. My mom finally popped up on the last day of court while they were going to issue custody with her newfound boyfriend, who was also an alcoholic, also an abuser. So she's still stuck in the same cycle she's been in. Hopping from man to man, getting abused, drinking, alcohol, the whole 9 yards. So he felt that her boyfriend felt that I needed to go over to the car and give my mom a hug. Can you believe me? You've left me. You've abandoned me. You haven't showed up at court. You haven't fought for me. You haven't even called to visit me in 6 months, but you want me to come give you a hug. I didn't talk to her that day. I went on home with my dad, and he didn't want me to be with Brian anymore. Decided I wasn't allowed to see him anymore. Set me off. I was pissed. I was really, really mad. So I decided I was going to get out a journal. And I was going to write down all these nasty little phrases and thoughts and how I hated my dad and he was a piece of crap and in and out of my life, just put all this dirty, nasty, mean, hateful things on paper. And purposefully leave it out for him to see. Because I knew if I was able to do that, he would read it. And I knew if he read it, it was going to set him off, and I was going to get what I wanted, which was ultimately to marry Brian. And sure enough, that's what happened. He found the journal, and he says, if that's what you want, fine, I'll go sign the papers. So the next morning, we head down to the courthouse in Cincinnati. My dad signs off for me to marry Brian. We threw my wedding together in a week. I was 16 years old, married at 16. Oh yeah, I thought it was cool. I'm married. I don't have to answer to either one of my parents. I can do what I want. I can write my own notes out for